I'm back. You may have noticed some things have changed around here. I am 2 years older, 2 years wiser, and with a bit of a change in backdrop. You may have also noticed I'm not branded as D20 Academy anymore, just myself now. And that's because I want to be doing a ton of kinds of content on here, not just RPG-focused things. There will still definitely be tabletop RPG, D&D related stuff for sure, but I want to try out tons of different kinds of content. So if you're looking forward to that, if you're interested in what that looks like, what that means, make sure that you subscribe so you can get alerted when it comes out. Well, this is part 6 of my complete comprehensive guide to Fantasy Flight Games Star Wars role-playing game. It's been a while, but we're back. This episode is all about the Force and how you can use the Force in your game. If you want all the other bits of info about how the game works, go ahead and check out parts 1 through 5. Well, this is the 6th part in a series over 2 years in the making. So, let's jump in. Start off, we're going to talk about force rating. So force rating is a way to measure how powerful a character is with the force. If they have a force rating of 0, which is most people, that just means that they're not force sensitive. They don't have access to that kind of stuff. But you are force sensitive if you have a force rating of 1 or higher. Anyone who chooses a force-based or like a Jedi-based career during character creation is going to automatically start with force rating 1, which it shows on the specialization sheet. But a character can become force sensitive later on if they choose a force sensitive specialization. A character's force rating determines how powerful they are with the force. Like I mentioned, the higher the number, the more powerful they are. It also dictates how many force dice they're going to roll when they make force checks. So whenever a force power or a force talent or anything like that tells a player to make a force check as a part of the thing that they're trying to accomplish, they're going to be rolling a number of force dice equal to their force rating to generate force points, which is represented by this symbol here. Force points are either light side or dark side, just like you might suspect. Light side characters, which is going to be most player characters and also any light side using non-player characters that they meet, use a light side points to generate the power that they need to activate these force powers and force talents, whereas dark side users use dark side points to generate their force powers. Obviously, if a player character becomes a dark side user, that will then change for them. They will start using dark side instead of light side. But for the most part, if you are a player character, you're focused on just those light side points. That's what you can use to activate your powers. Of course, the pull of the dark side is always there. A light side using a character, which is going to be most player characters, like I said, can actually use a dark side point that they rolled to generate the ability they needed to activate that power, even though it's not a light side point. However, it comes at a cost. A character can spend a dark side point as a light side point if they flip 1 destiny point from light side to dark side, suffer 1 conflict, and suffer 1 strain. If they can't do any of those 3 things, they can't use that dark side point to activate their power. Okay, once you've generated your amount of force points, whether from light side or dark side or whatever, once you've generated the amount that you want or that you need, you can then use these points to activate the force power and various things about it. So a basic force power usually just requires 1 force point in order to activate it. However, as you upgrade force powers to increase maybe the amount of targets they can target, the range that the power has, it may require you to spend more force points to activate those extra enhancements. Alright, so some force powers are going to ask you to make a combined force check, which basically is when you're using your force powers in tandem with something that you're doing in the world. So in this case, what you're going to do is grab a force dice and roll it alongside the dice you use for the normal check. So for example, let's say you're trying to do some sort of crazy force jump. That might require an athletics check, which is just going to be a normal athletics check as you make it with the dice system in the game, but you also roll a force dice with it. And what you're going to need to do is succeed on the athletics check and generate enough force points on the force dice to be able to succeed. So it means you need to succeed on both the regular check and on the force dice. So what are all these cool force powers we're talking about that use rolling of the dice? I mean, this is stuff I mean, they have such a surplus amount of force powers, it's crazy. You have Foresight, you have Force Jump, you have Force Choke, you have Jedi Mind Tricks, you have all that kind of stuff in this game. But how do you get them? Well, once you become Force sensitive, you can then look at the list of Force powers, and you can buy the basic power to unlock the ability to now use that power. And it just costs XP, just like anything else. So you just spend the XP, you unlock the basic power. You can now take that action, use that power. Okay, each basic power then has a tree of enhancement effects that you can spend XP to purchase. So this is going to be things like increasing the range, the strength and magnitude of the power, whatever it is. These work just like talent trees, they cost XP, and you can't buy an enhancement unless you have bought the one before it in the connected tree lines, just like the way that talent trees work. Okay, unless otherwise stated, using a force power counts as a character's action on their turn. It doesn't usually say this on the basic powers. It doesn't say, is this an action or a maneuver, or is it free? If it doesn't say it specifically, all force powers take an action on your turn. Okay, the list of force powers, their descriptions, all the different enhancement trees can be found on these pages of the core rulebooks. Keep in mind, Edge of the Empire and Age of Rebellion only feature 3 force powers in each of them because those books are much less focused on force characters. However, the Force and Destiny core rulebook features all 11 different force powers. So if you want to understand the full scope of all the different powers, you should check out the Force and Destiny book. Okay, so some force powers actually have a duration rather than an instantaneous effect. This is some kind of effect that is long-lasting, that you're trying to sustain over like multiple rounds or whatever. When you're trying to do this, it's called committing force dice. So remember, you have a number of force dice equal to your force rating. When you do one of these powers, you can commit a force dice to that power, which means you remove that force dice. You can't use it in any of your force power rolls from now on, because that dice is being used to sustain the power to keep on going. However, when you want the effect to end and you finish committing it, you get the dice back, and you can then spend that. You can keep rolling that with the rest of your dice when you make force checks. But essentially, if you want to commit a force dice to a power to keep the effect sustained, you have to remove a dice from your pool, which means you'll be rolling 1 less force dice to all the force checks that you make until you stop sustaining that power. So you might see that some talents on specialization trees are a little bit special. They have a little blast symbol by them. This is a force talent, which is basically, it just works like a normal talent, but it has some connection to the force in some way. Like you might be using the force in small minor ways to activate this talent to make it make sense. These work just like normal talents, not a huge deal. It's just that you can't purchase a force talent unless you are force sensitive, which means you have a force rating of 1 or more. So in Force and Destiny, player characters are going to be tracking their morality number. In the same way that characters in Age of the Empire track their obligation, characters in Age of Rebellion track their duty, characters in Force and Destiny are going to be tracking their morality, which is a number between 1 and 100, higher numbers being light side focused, lower numbers being more dark side leaning. Now, during each session, characters are going to gain something called conflict. The different ways to gain conflict is performing immoral actions that the GM just rules. That gains you some conflict because that was more dark side leaning. Using dark side points to power your force powers, as I described earlier, and then also failing fear checks can also produce conflict. All right, so at the end of every session, players are each going to roll 1d10, and if that number is less than the amount of conflict they gained that session, they subtract the number they rolled from the amount of conflict they had, and the difference decreases their morality, which means they get pulled a little bit closer to the dark side. However, if the roll in the d10 was greater than the conflict that they gained that session, they subtract the conflict from the roll, and they gain the difference in morality, and they increase their morality by the difference, meaning that they get a little bit closer to the light side because they didn't do that much dark side focused things that session. Now, player characters are initially always assumed to be light side users. However, should the morality ever dip below 30, they then transform into dark side users. Besides the immense role-playing narrative shift that this has in the story, there are some mechanical differences. So firstly, they generate force points using dark side symbols on the force dice instead of light side symbols like I described earlier. Second, their presence in the group just adds a darker twist to things affecting the destiny pool. So at the beginning of each session, after rolling destiny points, flip a light side point to a dark side point. their strain and wound thresholds may start to shift. So once they hit below morality 20, their wound threshold will increase by 1, their strain decrease by 1. Once they get to morality 10, super dark side focused, their wound threshold will increase by an additional 1, and their strain threshold will decrease by an additional 1. So even if a dark side character gets the morality back above 30, they still are dark side characters. The only way to get back to the light side is described in the Redemption from the Dark Side sidebar on this page of the Force and Destiny rulebook. So in the same way that characters can fall to the dark side, should they get the morality high enough, they can become paragons of the light side. So if a character gets the morality above 70, they are now a paragon of the light side. Now, once again, this has probably some role-playing narrative effects on the character and the story, that they have become so light side attuned, but also has a few mechanical additions. So at the beginning of each session, after rolling Destiny points, flip a dark side point to a light side point. Also, once they reach morality 80, their strain threshold increases by 1, and then morality 90, their strain threshold increases by an additional 1. So being a paragon of the light side can kind of help them a little bit get some more strain. So I have been playing this system for many, many years now, as I've said before. However, and I find this system to be a little bit swingy and weird. The morality system can be a little bit weird because the way that the conflict works is by session. It's not by in-game day or anything like that, which means that shorter sessions mean it gives characters less time to gain conflict. Just because they're making less rolls, they have less time to make immoral actions or whatever, which means in general, a shorter session will generate less conflict for each character. Meaning, less conflict, it's way easier to increase morality than decrease morality. So it's much easier for them to become paragons of the light side. On the opposite end, of course, longer sessions means it gives players plenty of more time to gain more conflict during the session because there's more time that they're playing, so more time is available for them to generate force points using dark side points or make immoral actions or whatever. Which means the longer your session is, the more conflict players are likely to gain, which means the more likely they are to decrease their morality than increase their morality. Because of the swinginess nature of this mechanic, which I find kind of odd, I'm pretty sure the game assumes game sessions are approximately 4 hours, around 4 hours. So I would maybe measure and use this conflict system for every 4-hour segment of game time about. So let's say each session of your game is 4 hours, then just do it as we've talked about every session. At the end of every session, right, you roll for the conflict, you roll the D10, all that kind of stuff. But let's say your sessions are about 2 hours. Maybe keep conflict for every 2 sessions, so a total of 4 hours, and then make the roll at the end of every 2 sessions to kind of balance it out. And if your session is super long, let's say you play 8-hour sessions, maybe halfway through each session, make that roll to try to increase or decrease morality, just to kind of balance things out a bit. There are also rules for triggering a character's morality in the same way that there are rules for like triggering obligation and duty in Edge of the Empire and Age of Rebellion. So if you want to look more into that, you can find it on this page of the Force and Destiny rulebook. All right, so that brings us to the end. We have one more part left. That is going to be for running the game, what it's like to run a campaign, what it's like to be a game master, running NPCs, all that kind of stuff. That part is going to be releasing very soon. But yeah, this is it. We're back after 2 years. I have a ton of exciting things planned for this channel, so keep an eye out.